News today. Brian Wilson, the co-founder of the Beach Boys, has died at the age of 82.
Wilson's family announced his death on social media a short time ago. They did not reveal a cause. Last year, it was revealed that Wilson had been diagnosed with dementia. He wrote, of course, some of the Beach Boys' biggest hits, including California Girls, I Get Around, God Only Knows, and Surfin' USA.
Can you hear that melody floating through your speakers right now? Those ethereal harmonies that seem to transport you to another dimension? Well, brace yourself for this. Yesterday, June 11th, 2025, the man who created these otherworldly sounds, Brian Wilson, the tortured genius behind the Beach Boys, closed his eyes for the final time at age 82. But here's what the mainstream media isn't telling you about his death. And trust me, this revelation will change how you see genius forever. This isn't just another celebrity obituary. This is the story of how one man's completely shattered mind became the birthplace of America's most beautiful music. Are you ready to discover the dark truth behind those sunny California harmonies? Let me paint you a picture that will break your heart. Hawthorne, California, 1950s. Imagine a sensitive young boy sitting alone in his cramped bedroom, partially deaf in one ear, not from an accident, but from his own father's violent rage. Murray Wilson didn't just discipline his son, he beat him so savagely that Brian lost hearing permanently. But here's where this story takes an incredible turn. Can you guess what happened when little Brian pressed his good ear against that old transistor radio? He didn't just hear Chuck Berry or Elvis like other kids. No, Brian Wilson heard something that existed nowhere else on planet Earth. He heard angels singing in perfect mathematical harmony, voices layering upon voices in impossible combinations that made his soul vibrate with pure emotion. While neighborhood kids were outside playing baseball and chasing girls, what do you think Brian was doing? He was in that tiny room teaching his little brothers Carl and Dennis to blend their voices like ocean waves, each note crashing into the next in perfect, devastating rhythm. But here's the part that will give you chills. Even at age 12, Brian knew these weren't just songs. They were prayers, desperate pleas from a broken child trying to create beauty in a house ruled by terror. Picture this scene. It's dinner time at the Wilson house. Murray Wilson storms in, drunk again, his leather belt already in his hand. Little Brian cowers, knowing that any wrong word, any creative idea shared too freely will result in another beating. But what do you think happened to all that fear, all that pain, all that desperate need for love? It didn't disappear. It transformed into something magical. Can you imagine what it's like to discover your life's purpose while running from the person who should protect you? Every night after the screaming stopped and the house fell silent, Brian would creep to his piano, his sanctuary, his church, his escape pod to dimensions where fathers didn't hurt their sons and music could heal everything. Fast forward to 1963, and here's where this story becomes absolutely mind-blowing. The Beach Boys are exploding across America with hits like Surfin' USA and California Girls. Teenagers are going crazy for their sunny, carefree sound, but do you want to know the shocking truth behind those seemingly innocent songs? While his bandmates Mike Love, Carl Wilson, Dennis Wilson, and Al Jardine were living the rock star dream, touring sold-out arenas, meeting screaming fans, living in hotels, Brian was trapped in a personal hell. Crippling panic attacks, social anxiety so severe he couldn't leave his house, and a growing obsession with sounds that existed only in his damaged mind. But here's what absolutely blew my mind when I discovered this hidden truth. Did this stop Brian Wilson? Did he give up and fade into obscurity like so many broken artists? Hell no. Instead, he did something that would literally change the course of music history forever. Picture Brian at 3 a.m. in a cramped recording studio, his fingers dancing across piano keys like a man possessed. His hair is unwashed, his clothes are rumpled, he hasn't seen sunlight in days. But listen to this, he's building pet sounds note by note, harmony by harmony, creating arrangements so complex and emotionally devastating that even the Beatles, called it the greatest album ever made. Can you feel the crushing irony here? The man writing about endless summers, California girls, and carefree beach parties was a prisoner in his own mind, battling demons that medication couldn't touch. But those demons, they weren't just destroying him, they were also his greatest creative fuel. Do you want to know how deep Brian's genius actually went? He would layer 20, 30, sometimes 40 different vocal tracks, each one recorded separately, building these massive walls of harmony that sounded like choirs of angels. Musicians who worked with him said it was like watching Mozart compose, except Mozart was slowly losing his mind. But then, in 1967, something happened that almost destroyed everything. Brian announces he's working on SMILE, His masterpiece meant to top the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. But wait until you hear how absolutely insane these recording sessions became, because what I'm about to tell you sounds like fiction, but it's terrifyingly real. Picture this. Brian Wilson, now weighing over 300 pounds, walks into the studio and demands that all the musicians play their instruments while sitting in a sandbox. Not metaphorically, an actual sandbox filled with real sand. Why? Because he wanted the music to sound beachy and grainy, but it gets worse. Are you ready for this? He's literally setting pianos on fire during recording sessions because he believes certain chord progressions have supernatural powers. He's convinced that his music can control minds, predict the future, maybe even communicate with otherworldly beings. Do you want to know the exact moment everything completely shattered? Picture this scene. It's late 1967. Brian is in the studio surrounded by hundreds of hours of Smile recordings, fragments of genius scattered across countless reels of tape. Suddenly, mid-session, he stops playing. His hands freeze above the piano keys. His eyes go wide with terror. "Destroy it," he whispers. "Destroy it all." And then, in one of music history's most heartbreaking moments, Brian Wilson begins systematically destroying the master tapes of what could have been his crowning achievement. The album that might have redefined popular music forever, gone, burned, erased. Why would a genius destroy his own masterpiece? Because Brian had become convinced that his music was cursed, that it was attracting evil forces, that completing Smile might literally destroy the world. For the next 3 years, Brian Wilson disappears. Not physically. His body remained in his Bel Air mansion, but spiritually, creatively, emotionally. He retreats to his bedroom, pulls the curtains shut, and hears the terrifying part that his own family later admitted. They thought they'd lost him forever. Can you imagine being a creative genius trapped inside a mind that's turned against you? Every song Brian tried to write sounded like noise. Every melody felt like a threat. The man who once heard angels singing now heard only demons whispering. Enter Dr. Eugene Landy, and this is where Brian's story becomes a cautionary tale about the abuse of power and trust. This so-called doctor was supposed to save Brian Wilson, but instead, he became his captor, his manipulator, his destroyer. For over a decade, Landy pumped Brian full of dangerous psychiatric drugs, not to heal him, but to control him. He moved into Brian's house, monitored his every conversation, controlled his diet, his relationships, his music, even his bathroom breaks. Brian Wilson, one of America's greatest musical minds, became a zombie, a hollow shell of the genius who once revolutionized popular music. But here's what makes this even more sinister. Landy was charging Brian's family $35,000 per month while systematically destroying the very person they'd hired him to save. It was medical abuse disguised as treatment, and it nearly killed one of music's most important voices. But then, like something out of a fairy tale, something miraculous happened. A woman named Melinda Ledbetter walked into Brian's life. She wasn't a doctor, wasn't a music industry executive, wasn't looking for fame or money. She was just a car saleswoman who saw through the drugs and manipulation to the broken soul underneath. Can you imagine the courage it took to stand up to a powerful doctor and literally rescue one of music's greatest minds? Melinda didn't just fall in love with Brian Wilson. She fought for him, protected him, and slowly, carefully helped him remember who he used to be. Picture this scene. After years of legal battles, Melinda finally gets Brian away from Dr. Landy's control. For the first time in over a decade, Brian sits down at a piano without someone telling him what to play. His fingers find the keys, trembling at first, then growing stronger, and then something magical happens. He begins to play Love and Mercy, not just a song, but his autobiography set to music. Every note carries the weight of his journey from darkness back to light. When he sings Love and Mercy, that's what you need tonight. He's not just performing. He's testifying, witnessing, proclaiming that healing is possible even for the most broken souls. But here's what gives me absolute chills every time I think about it. In his 60s, after everything he'd been through, Brian Wilson did the impossible. He returned to that abandoned masterpiece, Smile, and finally completed it, 37 years after walking away in terror. Picture him in the studio, now an old man with white hair and gentle eyes, carefully reconstructing those scattered fragments of genius. Each song was like archaeologically excavating pieces of his younger self, buried under decades of trauma and medication. But somehow, miraculously, the magic was still there. And when he finally performed Smile live, can you imagine thousands of people singing every word back to the man who thought he was worthless, who'd been convinced his music was cursed? Tears streaming down his face, Brian Wilson witnessed his broken dreams touching souls across generations. Then came the ultimate validation. Pet Sounds, that album he'd created in isolation and fear, was finally recognized as one of the greatest achievements in recording history. Paul McCartney called it his favorite album. Musicians around the world studied it like a sacred text. The shy, frightened boy from Hawthorne had created something eternal, but Brian's greatest triumph wasn't musical. It was human. Despite everything he'd endured, the abuse, the manipulation, the years lost to mental illness, he never lost his capacity for love. He married Melinda, adopted her children, and slowly rebuilt not just his career, but his soul. Do you know what Brian Wilson's final message to the world was? Through songs like Love and Mercy, through his autobiography, through his very survival, he told us that mental illness doesn't have to be a death sentence, that with the right support, even the most fragile minds can continue creating beauty, that our wounds, however deep, don't have to define our worth. Yesterday, at 82 years old, Brian Wilson's extraordinary journey came to an end, but his harmonies, born from genius and pain, crafted in darkness and redeemed by love, will echo through eternity. His story proves that sometimes our greatest gifts emerge from our deepest wounds, that the most beautiful art often comes from the most broken hearts. Think about this for a moment. How many times have you felt overwhelmed by your own struggles? How many times have you wondered if your pain serves any purpose? Brian Wilson's life is proof that our darkness can become light for others, that our healing journey can inspire hope in broken souls we'll never even meet. So here's my challenge for you today. If Brian Wilson's story of struggle and redemption moved you, if his message of love and mercy resonates deep in your heart, will you share it with someone who needs to hear that their battles don't define their worth? And if you or someone you love is fighting mental health demons right now, remember Brian's promise. There's always hope for love and mercy. Healing is possible. Beautiful things can still emerge from broken places. The song doesn't have to end just because the harmony gets complicated. Hit that subscribe button to witness more untold stories of the artists who shaped our world, because their struggles and triumphs deserve to be remembered, celebrated, and shared. The harmonies may have stopped, but as long as we keep telling these stories, as long as we keep believing in love and mercy, the song goes on forever. Now I want to hear from you. What's your favorite Brian Wilson song, and how did his music touch your life? Have you ever found beauty emerging from your own struggles? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep his legacy of hope alive together. And don't forget to hit that notification bell, because next week we're diving into another story that will change how you see the connection between genius and pain. Until then, remember Brian's words, love and mercy. That's what you need tonight. And that's what the world needs every night.